Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to our session on visual analytics for professionals, where we'll be providing you with the framework and field guide that we use in our consulting experience to bring a project from concept to production and server. As a quick poll, how many of you in the audience create content for other users in Tableau? Yeah, perfect. You guys are in the right place because we are going to be showing you our step-by-step guide that we follow to achieve a successful project. I want to touch on another session that covers similar topics that we'll be covering today. It did already happen, but you will be able to access the content on TC Live at the end of the week when the link goes out to all the content. So just keep in mind Blueprint, Hammer, and Nails edition if you want to get some additional information on the blueprint from what you see in our presentation. So I'd like to kick it off by introducing myself. My name is Maureen Reilly, and I'm an Associate Analytics Consultant at Tableau. I'm based out of Red Bank, New Jersey. Oh, New Jersey people in the audience? Nice, okay, cool. And I've been working at Tableau for about 2 years, but I've been using Tableau for 7 years, and I work with customers on site to help them develop their different Tableau projects in a nutshell.
Ben Porter. For probably about the last 10 years, I've been either building things in Tableau, building teams to build things in Tableau, or teaching visual analytics, both at graduate programs or to customers or internally to our own consultants. I've a lot of time in the tool set and then also relational databases, machine learning algorithms, that type of stuff as well. So I think I've built probably almost everything I think that may have been built at some point in Tableau. But there's always new stuff. There's always problems to solve. So this is really kind of our collective 17 years of working in this daily. Some of the stuff we want to share with y'all.
So Ben and I are both in Tableau's professional services as analytics consultants. We will go anywhere in the world where anybody needs us to go to provide our help with bringing a project to the finish line. We typically work with a 10-day standard to develop a project. So we want to show you how we are able to develop an entire project in just 10 days. Here you go. Great.
Thanks. So you may have heard a little bit about the blueprint this week. The blueprint is one of the things that we're very proud of here within Tableau. We spent a good time working on it. All of this stuff that we're covering today lies within what's known as the analytics best practices subway stop on our lovely blueprint subway map. So everything that's there that we talk about is either covered directly there or it'll be available as an attachment to the session when that goes out on Thursday. So in addition to the deck, we have a 40-page working draft that covers a lot of this stuff quite extensively. So visual analytics, let's kind of ground this a little bit first. Anyone here a retail analytics guru? No retail analytics guru. All right, I'll look at you though. Tell me, did we make our sales quota? Yeah. Did we make our margin quota? Bunch of retail analytics sales gurus in the audience, right? Y'all are liars. Okay. This is visual analytics, right? You are taking information and you are displaying it in a way that answers questions quickly, right? One of the neat things too is you also have interactivity. That's another key foundation of visual analytics, right? So if we have a question about phones, right? Anyone want to tell me what the second best selling phone brand was this quarter? Samsung. See, y'all work in for Best Buy. I know this for a fact. Y'all do this on a daily basis, right? This is the idea, right? We could get dumped into any place in the world and we need to build something that makes sense for the audience that's intended to. Well, let's take a look at this. Anyone want to tell me which product had the lowest margin this quarter? Right, yeah, this is not visual analytics, right? So this is not what we do, right? This is a crosstab of data, and that's all right. Sometimes it has a purpose, but this is not what we do, right? What we're doing is we're building stuff that answers questions, right? We're building products. This is a data set. It's not really visual analytics, or we consider it to be, right? So when we're thinking about, visual analytics, these are some things that, kind of we have at the end of the talk where we talk about the reference materials that we use. We think about If we want to build valuable visual analytics, what are the properties of those? So we like to break it down to kind of 3 key areas, right? They need to be effective, right? So what we saw earlier where you looked at it for about 5 seconds, you said, yep, met our sales quota. Nope, didn't make our margin quota. Yep, phones, that's number 2, right? That's effective visual analytics, right? You can see it, you consume it, you know what you're looking at really quickly. Second thing is performant, right? So it needs to be snappy. Like, it's pretty snappy when you click a PowerPoint button and it pops up for you, but what we build things, we have a pretty high standard for performance, right? We want to build things where you're looking at probably about 3 seconds between interaction and absolute max. We like things that move through it, right? Because it keeps your audience engaged. Last thing, it has to be applicable, right? So if we needed to look at sales by geography, the last thing we showed doesn't give you sales by geography. It's not usable by the intended audience. So these are the kind of things that we look at when we're building things, right? So if you think about it, kind of the way we look at it is visual design, data design, and product design, right? And these are the things that we focus a lot of our time and attention on as we're going through the process of building this, right? So this is our system in a nutshell, right? And this is the cycle of visual analytics. This is verbatim what is in Blueprint. We could spend an entire day talking about this. Maureen and I could spend a day talking about this to you. We only have 1 hour. So what we're going to do is we are going to give you the all-killer, no-filler version, right? We are going to give you the tools that we use. Those are the first things we reach for when we're going ahead and we're building things. And we're also going to focus on a lot of things that are really outside of the tool set, right? So today, or through this conference, these areas of choosing visual mapping and developing insights, these are visual analytics best practices as you apply them in Tableau. This is, what chart type should I use? How should I use formatting? How should I use color? Probably 20 hours of content here at this session about that. So we're going to briefly touch through those, right? Because there's a lot of other great sessions around that. We're talking about the system as a whole. We're going to spend a lot of time here when we're talking about the tasks, right? And we'll talk about how this system all works in a minute. But these are the things that happen outside of Tableau, right? These are sort of the processes that you need to understand as a person who's delivering stuff in Tableau. So that's really kind of where a lot of the stuff that we want to share with you today, the stuff that makes us successful, the soft skills, as you will, right? So this system, right, and this was put out probably about 8-9 years ago by Chris Stolte and a couple other folks, is the idea of, as you're building, you have a task, right? So what was my sales, right? Grab a little data, sales data. Choose a visual mapping, right? So is it sales over quarter? Is it sales by product? What's going on there? Looking at that data and deciding then what insights come out of that, sharing that, then kind of working that cycle as you go, right? So the idea is it is somewhat of a linear cycle, process as you're building things, but as illustrated by these wonderful orange arrows, the center is that you are going to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, a couple steps sideways. You're going to be moving, right, through this whole entire process, right? It is essentially a non-linear process, and getting comfortable with that is some of the things that we're going to talk about as well.
So that brings us to the first phase of our step-by-step type framework that we have, and that's to define your audience persona first. You want to always keep your audience at the center of your design because that's who's going to be using it. It's really hard sometimes to design for other people and not for ourselves. So that's why I really want to reiterate to always design for your audience first. What's helpful in this step is to ask some leading questions to get the answers that you need to actually start designing something. Has anyone been in a situation where someone they're designing for, maybe your boss says something like, I saw a really cool map, so I want to start with a map right away. Yes, exactly. So and you might be thinking, well, we only really have 2 geographical data points, so that's not really a good visualization. You don't want to pick a chart type first and then try to find questions that will accommodate that. Think of the questions first, and then the best chart that will answer those questions. So who is the target audience that will be using this product? Is it the VPs? Is it the analysts? Both of those people are going to be needing different tools to answer their questions. Another question to think of is, what is the business problem that they are trying to solve? Once that is defined, you can again begin to think of, okay, do I want a bar chart that they can drill into? Do I need a map to look at the location of where a certain sales person is, or something like that? How will the audience be using the tool to take action? So once you have the tool, what do you want them to do with it? Are they going to email somebody if they notice sales are down in an area? Are they going to want to figure out how to increase production on something that's selling well or decrease production on something that's not selling well? So think about what you want them to do with the insights that they're gathering from the product that you're making. Then I like to define what the tool needs to do in order for it to be successful. So you can divide this up into kind of 3 categories: what it must do, what it should do, and what it could do. Must being what it absolutely must do for it to be successful. So defining 3 to 5 things that fit that criteria of what it must absolutely do. Should is what it should be able to do, assuming you have all of the data that you need to answer their pertinent business questions. And could is that bonus material that may even be able to wait for a 2.0 version, but it's good to start thinking about it as early as possible to see if you can work it in along the way. After that, think about how the tool will be used in terms of what device. Is it going to be used on a laptop? Is it going to be used on 2 screen monitors? Is it going to be used on a small phone screen? That's all going to affect how you're going to design your product. Also, how long do people have to look at it on a daily basis? So if you're a salesperson who's on the road all the time, you might be looking at it for 5 seconds before you head into a meeting. If you're an analyst, you might have an hour to look at something before you provide a recommendation to someone and you have your giant big screen. All of those things are important to consider in your design because that's going to affect how you lay everything out and how your user experience is going to be. And then if there is a current solution, you want to keep that in mind as well. What people do like about the current solution, maybe you want to keep doing that. What they don't like about it, you don't want to keep doing that. So definitely keep in mind what people are currently doing because that can help inform your design in the future. Something that can help if you're having trouble pulling the information out of your audience and they keep doing things like, oh, I want a donut chart, I want a map, I want a bar chart, is try a little fill-in-the-blank exercise to force them to give you the answers that you need. You can do this by literally a fill-in-the-blank exercise or just kind of asking these questions and then secretly getting the answers that you want. So things like what their job role is, what their needs are, how they'll be using it, etc. And hopefully you'll get kind of a long story like this where they're telling all of their wants and needs and what they do on a daily basis, where you can begin to pull out that information that's actually helpful to you in your design. So once you have pulled out all this information, if you're having a meeting with all of the people who will be using it and developing the tool, you can start having a whiteboarding session with multiple people where everyone in the room sketches out what they think the final solution should look like. Just take a couple minutes to do that and just literally pen to paper, marker to whiteboard, whatever the case is. It's really nice to just kind of get the ideas out there without any kind of restrictions on availability of data, et cetera. And once you each have a sketch, you can collaboratively go over it together and create one solution that everyone can kind of get an agreement on. Of course, it can change down the road, but it's really nice going into design already having a nice map of what you think the final product should look like. So here's an example of a collaborative design. This is just, again, sketched out, hand-sketched, of what a sales dashboard could look like. And we've even included certain things like where the KPIs will go at the top, where the legends are going to go, what actions we want the user to take with drilling in. So all that's included in the sketch, and that space is thought about ahead of time so that when you're going into design, you're not like, oh no, I need a whole section for filters and I didn't really plan my space for that. So keep that in mind as well. Also,
I'd say too, right, you're lowering the barrier to entry on this, right? The audience doesn't need to understand that, oh, you're gonna use an action filter or you're gonna use this, 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 and this. So say, I wanna drill in from here to here. It's that simple, right? It's a very time-effective way to capture the quote-unquote requirements.
And then also, after you have your final sketch, take some time to consider those user stories that you developed while you were examining your audience persona. So what are those different things that came up and where are they being answered within your dashboard that you're designing? So behind the scenes here, if you're having your kickoff meeting, there's probably a database manager somewhere in the room that's seeing all of this great design and just kind of thinking, well, I got to get them the data so they can actually build this thing. So there's that person behind the scenes that thinks, okay, I need to create this data source so that they can actually bring this into action. So that's another thing that we will be covering today is how to organize where to better find and model your data. To close out phase 1, it's important to consider also how this is going to be shared at the end of the whole process. So assuming you're going to be publishing to Tableau server, you want to have a sense of what the governance process is for the particular server you're working on, if there is one. And if there's not, it's probably a good time to start thinking how you will want people to be publishing and verifying content. So what I have up now is just one example of what you could do to publish your content. We have creators who will publish a first draft to an unverified sandbox, meaning it's not data that has been checked, approved, it's more of a first draft. Approvers and testers will then be able to access it to verify, yes, these calculations are right, or no, this needs another look, or you're not using our company branding correctly, etc. Once it's approved, the approver can push it out to the approved folder so that the final audience knows, hey, okay, I know this is good to go. I can trust every data point that I see in it so that I know that I can make decisions based off of the tool. And the final thing, the housekeeping thing to consider is, of course, the project management structure in terms of who the responsible team members are for the project and what resources will be available to them, what the review cycle will be. If we think back to that 10-day standard, you're going to want to be meeting multiple times a week, of course, to make sure the project's staying on track. Of course, if you have more time, that cadence might be weekly, monthly, whatever the case may be. But 10 days, you definitely want to be meeting multiple times a week. And how those communications are going to be. Is it going to be WebEx? Are you in person? Is it email? It's important to have all this agreed upon early on so that nobody is on different pages throughout the rest of the development.
Thank you. All right. So get data, right? So we've worked through kind of the session that Maureen just walked through is probably about the first 2 to 4 hours we're with the customer, right? We are going to cover all of that in about a 2 to 4 hour period. What we're doing next is we're going and getting the data, and this is always a little bit of a variable, right? So we'll keep that in mind when we're discussing it, and we'll have some of the easy ways where you might be getting the data within an hour. Sometimes it might take a little bit longer to get to the data, just depending on where everything is. All right, so out of that story, right, where we're talking about, hey, this is the stuff that we want to look at in the sales visualization dashboard, you can start to click through and start thinking about some of those fields out of there, right? I need close date, I need revenue, I need profit, yada, 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 right? The easy button is this already lives as a Tableau data source, right, on server, right? And sometimes that happens, sometimes it's not. But if it's there, a couple of things that you want to consider, right? Is this complete? Who potentially is the owner of this data source, right? So often in these meetings, we're working, say, oh, hey, Martha, I think she's the owner of this. It's like sales opportunity or something like that. But you're a Tableau wizard. You can go find this, right? So off we go, right? On to the platform. So there also is maybe a not so easy way, right? Where instead of it's all on a Tableau data source on the Tableau platform, walk through that and say, oh, you know what? We know that these fields, these are actually in our sales data mart. And these fields, right? That's actually living in our sales management data mart, right? This stuff, well, you know what? We're going to just have to throw this in an Excel spreadsheet or maybe a Tableau parameter or something along those lines, or just hard-coded as a calculated field, right? So this is also a way that we operate a lot of times as well. Important part is that we've backed out those user stories into the actual data fields that we are going to actually go ahead and get and start developing on. We'll show both ways, right? So in the easy peasy way, right? We know it's called sales opportunity something. We jump on the server. We search for sales opportunity. We look for our certified data sources that come up saying sales opportunity. We are in the money. We are moving, right? This is, a minute of your time, right? We jump to it. We start to take a look at it, right? We can start to see the other things that are used, right? So we can see there's almost 1,000 workbooks connected to this. So yeah, this is probably the sales opportunity that everyone was talking about, right? It gives us pretty good confirmation of what's going on here. Martha, right? Oh, Martha Jakowski, right? Good to know, right? So, Martha is our data storage. She's the person that owns and certifies this data source. If we have questions, we can reach out to Martha, right? So we're moving pretty quickly here when things are as a certified Tableau data source. One also thing that is great is, we understand what this data represents. Now, there's a lot of different ways to do data dictionaries, but at a bare minimum, one of the things that it's critical to understand is what does a single row of data represent in this data? What does a single row of data represent in this particular data source, right? There's a difference between an opportunity and an opportunity line item, right? If an opportunity has multiple line items with it, you gotta understand if you're counting your opportunities, you're gonna overcount them, right? So you have to understand what a single row of data represents when you're doing this, when you're building. All right, so let's say that potentially the data does not live on a Tableau data source, right? You're not necessarily stuck right now. There's other places things could live on the Tableau ecosystem. If it's maybe a more established or an older customer, you've been doing this for a little bit, your data source may be embedded into a Tableau workbook, right? So there may be joins and federations in there you can take a look at to get going, right? You could look at that and say, okay, I need this, but I need to join in this other table, whatever the case may be, right? It's fun, you can download those and you can go to that. Maybe it's a little bit newer. You might have an upstream Tableau prep flow, and this is where your life gets pretty easy, right? So an upstream Tableau prep flow, you can download it, you can take a look at it. You might need to add in a table, you might need to add in a field, but it's gonna be much faster, right? Than downloading the workbook, looking at the joins that are in the workbook. God forbid there's custom SQL in there, like pulling that thing apart, right? You're going to be moving a lot faster if you do have a prep workflow in there, right? As you're going through this, you want to think about a bunch of different data governance considerations. So we already talked about the groups and projects, right? So you should have already identified both where the project this should go to, right? And also, if this data source lives in a different project, do you have access to that, right? And so you might need to work with the site admin to get access to it. Publishing requirements, right? So what are the standards, right? We have our own standards for what we push out, right? Before we put something on server, it already needs to have a certain level of performance, right? So one of the things with Tableau, and those of you who've been developing for a little bit, you develop on desktop. You don't develop on server, right? You develop on desktop first, you get that first prototype, and then you push it to server. You also want to push something to your sandbox environment that is relatively performant, right? It's okay if it's a little slow, it's okay if it's a little doggy, but you don't want to put something on there that's 60-second clicks as you're going through, right? When you show that to your audience, it's not going to work off the get-go, right? So we'll talk about some of the tricks that we use for getting things performant, right? And then also too, understanding what's the standard if you need to go to production content, right? Are those different, right? Or should you get as close as you can? Regulatory compliance, if you're in a highly regulated industry, financial services, if you're in healthcare, if you have to be selling financial services to healthcare, you got to understand, do I need to aggregate this data, right, to alleviate some concerns around HIPAA or FCRA, that type of stuff. So, you want to have a pretty good handle on that before you get going with this. Oh boy. Oh goodness. Okay. Whew. Sweet. Safe. I thought I'd have to go with the mouse the whole entire time. Show's over, folks. So if you do have the opportunity to choose between Prep and Tableau Desktop for, you might have to do a little bit of light data modeling like we talked about. I would say if you have the opportunity to use Prep, I would use Prep, right? It's generally going to be a little bit faster, a little bit more efficient if you have to do extensive amount of data modeling. If it's just a light thing, if you download a Tableau workbook that essentially has the data source that you need, right? Maybe you don't need to recreate a whole entire prep workflow in that, but if you're going to be spending more than an hour in it, probably prep is going to be your friend there. Especially too, if we're talking about right back to database, the product is expanding very, very, very quickly, right? It's going to be just faster to work through that. When we're working through, right, it's important to understand joins and that type of stuff, right? Getting those keys if we have to work down into that level and understanding how we're going to be joining things. We're going to talk about calculations in a little bit, but how do we need to, where should the calculations live in this? Do we want to live in the data source or do we want to live in the workbook? There's trade-offs to both of those, right? And also studying shaping of the data, right? I mean, folks, if you've been building in Tableau for a couple of minutes, you understand that the shape of the data, right? We prefer, kind of what we call skinny and long versus wide and shallow. Adding calculations. When you're doing this, there's kind of two ways you can think about it. Putting the calculation in the data source itself, there's an advantage there because then that calculation will cascade to other parts of the organization if they can reuse that calculation, right? If, say, you're doing it in a prep workflow, you can calculate once and then aggregate and put it in two different places, right? So you're only managing the upkeep of that calculation in a single place. That has advantages when we talk about product management down the road, right? You got to think about this as a product, what's it's going to look like in 3 months, 6 months, et cetera. Right? What we like to hand off to our customers are things that are easy to maintain, right? Sometimes you don't necessarily have that option, right? So the nice thing about the flexibility is putting the calculation in the workbook, it allows it to live there if it doesn't need it anywhere else. Sometimes a calculation is just specific to a workbook and it should live there. Kind of think of general data sources as being a little bit more generalized, right? And have a little more broad applicability. So if your data source, or so if your calculation is not in the data source, it has to go in the workbook. Aggregation. So the first way that you can probably improve, I'd say 80% of the workbooks I've seen in terms of performance is aggregating the data, right? If you're going down to, say, the sales opportunity level, but you're only really looking things at maybe a product level or a geography level, right? You're going to get an order of magnitude terms of a smaller data set, right? You're going to be essentially taking 1 million rows and rolling it up to 100,000 rows, right? So aggregation is an important concept to keep in mind, right? Oftentimes what we'll think about and we'll suggest doing is building a analysis set or an executive summary set that takes those opportunities and rolls them up to the level that's going to be most consumed by executives or, say, ad hoc analysts, right? If you have some operations folks that need to get down and see that opportunity level, right, you can create two. But this is the idea, right? If you're using something like a prep workflow, put all your calculations in, right? You've got the granular level, and then you add in an aggregation step. And there you go, right? You've put the calculation in one place, but it lives in a couple different data sources, right? It's efficient, right? If you need to change that calculation, change it in one spot, right? Makes your life a little bit easier. Aggregate.
And that brings us to phase 3. So you will have had your whiteboarding diagram mapped out, so you have a direction of how you want the design to go, and you have your data model. So now you can start the fun part, or at least my favorite part, which is designing the final product in Tableau Desktop. The important things to consider are the look and feel you want your final users to have. Is it going to be consistent with other tools that exist? Is it consistent throughout the tool? Do you have your corporate branding in there? Have you considered what colors you'd like to use, fonts, things like that? There's, of course, endless things we can talk about in terms of dashboard design, but I want to direct you guys to 2 important resources that we use regularly while we're designing for our customers. And they're both free on the Tableau website. The first is the Visual Analytics Best Practices white paper. It's great for just thinking of what chart type to use based off of the question that you have in your data. It's also great for inspiration, or if you're just stuck and you just want an idea of how to best represent something, it's a great resource and it's just free on the Tableau website. The other is the Best Practices for Designing Efficient Workbooks. Like Ben was saying, performant workbooks are very important because no one's going to stick around and use something that's not running at a snappy pace. So again, that is also a free white paper that you can access to aid you while you are building your workbooks. It also provides kind of a nice checklist to go through if you're experiencing performance issues to refer to. Here's just one example of the kinds of nuggets of information that you can pull out from the Visual Analytics white paper. Just an example of a better way to look at sales versus targets. There's even more insights than just this in there. Just wanted to share that one example with you.
Quick poll of hands. Everyone has read that or seen it a little bit? Okay, yeah, no, it's solid country gold, right, for a reason. Yeah, no, these things are foundational for what we do.
So I know that we kind of blew through phase 3, but imagine yourselves doing all of the visual analytics best practices. You have a proficient workbook. your visualization is finalized, you're going to move into phase 4, where you start to think of the intersection of what's going to happen at your viz, meaning what the users are going to do with it now that they have it. So this will be kind of more of, again, a testing phase. This is not published to production just yet, but you want to get users in there actually using the tool to make sure it's doing what they want it to be doing. You may even ask them to perform specific tasks in it to make sure that they're getting the answers that they sought to find in the first place. So again, going back to our retail dashboard, something that we might have our user do is figure out, okay, what happened with phones? We did not meet our sales quota with phones. A simple viz and tooltip will allow them to drill in to get more information there. This is also incorporating things like parameters, viz and tooltips, actions, filters, are great ways to get all of our musts, shoulds, and possibly some coulds all into one view without having 18 sheets on one dashboard. So you're inviting your user to explore, find questions and answers themselves, instead of just trying to guess what they're looking for and providing them all that information at once. So it's important to think of that as well. We want to encourage our users to explore our viz within as a tool instead of just kind of a static PDF or something like that.
Wonderful. Right, so we're now at kind of like the final phase of, we've gone through, we've had our whiteboarding sessions, we understand what we want to build, we found our data, we've built our preliminary visualizations. We've gone ahead, we've started to layer in some actions, right, to get that interactivity. So the idea is we can answer as much questions as we can in as small of a kind of space as we can. The last thing we want to do before we start reviewing this to our audiences is put in some sort of calls to action, right, or figure out what those insights are and maybe make them pop a little bit, right? So one of the things you can do, as you'll notice, working with your tooltips to provide a little bit more information there, or also providing two URL actions, right? So these are things that you can use to connect to email, right? So hey, I've got a question about this others, right? Why is other our largest selling brand in phones? Like, is it we don't know what they are, or are we selling really like 10,000 things, we're rolling them up, right? I might have a question around that. So I can add in a URL action that says email the category manager, right? It's actually set to your email address. So when they download the workbook and they email the category manager, you're gonna get that one. Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, we have it's about a 40-page document that we use. We also have if you want to take a look at this, some of the stuff that we've built in here, that's going to be hosted as well as a file. So you could download this, reverse engineer a little bit. Now, how does that email action work, or that type of stuff as well. Right. We don't want to leave you totally high and dry. Right, another thing that you can build into these are extensions. So dashboard extensions are relatively new. They've been out in the marketplace for about 18 months, and these are essentially third-party libraries that you can build into your dashboards that extend the capability of things, right? So one of the more interesting ones is write back to data, right? So this is a write back functionality. You might look at something, you might have some results, and you say, you know what, I want to save that as our Q3 targets, right? You can push a button that's going to write back to your data source, and that might be available then, right, for you to look at and pull back in other visualizations. There's a variety of extensions out there. Some do natural language processing, some do machine learning algorithms. Some of them do non-supported standards chart types like Sankey diagrams, right? So extensions are really a way to potentially radically push the actions that you can take from this, right? Okay, so what we just talked about through now is what Maureen and I, we show up Monday morning, 9 a.m. It's now about Wednesday at lunchtime. We've worked through all of that in about maybe 2.5 days, and we're ready to review with our audience, right? So, now, show of hands, how many thinks like after 2.5 days we nailed it? Like they say, yep, here's sign the check, go home. Yeah, no, right? So this is where like the fun begins, right? This is where really, we start to earn our paychecks. So this is where we start to have review sessions with our audiences, right? Generally, as we recommend, we're trying to get this done in 10 days, so we're going to try and meet 2 to 3 times a week for at least 30 minutes, where we're showing this, we're getting feedback, and we're iterating. This is where it feels like this part of the cycle can be overwhelming. First time I did this 10 years ago, I was devastated. I had worked on this thing, I had showed it to people, and they had feedback, but no, this is really, really, really good, right? This is part of the process, right? This is normal. Friction is your friend during this process, right? Friction is absolutely your friend during this process. It's one of those things that, as you get more used to it, it'll become a little bit normal. We'll see. Maureen, I have a question for you.
Yes.
By chance, have you ever worked on a project where there was zero friction during the review process?
Yes, I have, and it felt really good at the time when you're just thinking you're nailing all the requirements the whole way through, don't need to make any changes, no feedback, but you get to that final review with maybe all of the key stakeholders, some users.
And the boss, the executive vice president of analytics.
Right, and then they just blow the whole thing up. It's not what they wanted, it's not what they thought they were getting along the way, or whatever the case is, and you kind of feel like you have to go all the way back to square one. We don't want that to happen. I'd rather stay, at square 3 and 4 for longer to prevent myself from having to go all the way back to the beginning and start from scratch. So like Ben said, the friction is definitely good because that means you're figuring out how people are actually going to be using it. If you're kind of getting a lot of just quick feedback and yes men in the room, you might not actually be on the right track as you may be being led to believe.
Yep, 100%, absolutely. It is tough, but after a couple revolutions through it, you start to pick up on it, right? And you start to expect it, and it starts to become great, right? I view it as give me more feedback. Like, how do you want this? How do you want this? How do you want this? You're essentially taking a very abstract thing and you're actually bringing it to life, right? It's important that you kind of understand that bit. So as a couple of ideas as you're working through, oftentimes you focus on the usability more than fonts and colors and that type of thing. Fonts and colors and layout, all that is critically important. But generally, we like to do that last, right? Because things could change as you're going through that would affect maybe the fonts you're using or the colors you're using, that type of thing. So pick some good colors, right? Spend some time on it, but I would worry about making it conform to brand standard as about the last step in the process, right? Get the bugs out of the interactions and all that stuff, and hey, is this the right way we want to look at this? And hey, what's the decision we can drive off of this? Best way to get some feedback is asking, like, hey, what was the second highest phone category, right? Do we meet our sales target? Ask these as you're reviewing, right? And if they can say yes and yes, okay, this is good, this is good, this is good, you're confirming you're on the right track a little bit as you're going. Critically important, right? So as you're building this, the first thing you're going to show, they're going to, if you had, say, 5 user stories, hey, number 1 is great, number 2 is good. You know what? After we see those 2, 3, 4, and 5 are kind of the next things we said to do, and you did what we said to do, but we want to change it a little bit, right? This is normal. This is part of the friction of it, right? People are kind of changing their minds as they're seeing stuff. This is just the creative process at work. So tell them to reorganize the priority for you. Hey, got it. So 3, 4, and 5, we're going to change this to 7, 8, 9, and 10. What do we work on first, right? Are we good with that? Got it, right? Have them tell you what they want. They should be driving the priorities, and you're executing as best you can against those priorities, right? Also, if there's something that's there, annotate it, right? Hey, Joe, the site admin, hasn't added us yet to the group, so we can't test the publishing. Annotate that, get it done, solve those problems as quick as you can. As we're conducting quality control, accuracy, right? Accuracy is paramount. It's okay when you're in a testing state to not have things be 100%, right? And understand that, got it, this calculation isn't quite right, Rick, but we're going to work on it as we go. You should identify what you're going to, confirm accuracy to beforehand, right? So, if they have, say, a monthly PowerPoint report, you're looking at past month and this month and say, okay, got it, right? This is what we're doing. Yep, the data is accurate, data is valid. If they have a data steward, they can look in, come in, lend their credence to it, but it's critical, right? Performance is not an afterthought, right? You don't get to the end and say, all right, how do we get this going better, right? This is something that we want to be building as we go. So there's workbooks, or the white books around designing efficient workbooks, right? You should be thinking about it as you go. Performance in Tableau is multifaceted, so it's not something you want to think about right at the end. Might be a little bit too late. Again, organizational visual design standards, as you're getting here, let's put the final, paint and polish on it as we go.
Thank you. As our phase 6 kind of B section, we want to think about how this is going to be published and shared to your greater audience, not only on Tableau server, but within other creators within your organization.
And sorry, back to the timeline. So this would be, we looked at it maybe Wednesday at noon for the first time with our audience. We iterated. It's now Thursday lunchtime. We really want to catch that plane home at Friday the next day. Back to the story.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we went through all the work of data modeling, defining our user stories. If someone else needs to leverage the same information again in the future, we don't want them having to start from scratch the same way we did. We want them to be able to use the information that we gathered. So creating a data dictionary is a great way to do that. It can just be a Word document, something in Excel, a wiki, SharePoint. It doesn't have to be anything too complex. But you want to include things like the intended audience. Okay, who was this for? Why did we build this thing in the first place? What the business use is, tracking sales, for example. What kind of connection type is being used? Are you using a live connection or an extract? That's important to know for someone else who's trying to leverage the content. Who are the owners of the data source or the owners of the project, just so that they have someone they can contact. You're not in that problem of emailing one person, they forward it to the next person, and just trying to figure out who the heck owns the thing in the first place. If there are any join clauses to be aware of, so if there's multiple data tables that are being used, just again, so no one has to go hunting around for information that you already figured out. What the different field definitions are. This can also exist in the comments of the default properties in your Tableau server published data source, so you don't necessarily always have to include them directly in the data dictionary as well, but just something to explain why a calculation was built, what it means, if it's not immediately obvious from the field name. If you're using a Tableau prep flow, just have an image of the flow, again, just right there so that the person can see how many steps are in it, any pivoting was necessary, joins, aggregation, et cetera, just before they have to go hunt and find the flow saved somewhere on your guys' shared drive. And also a brief description of why you started the project in the first place so that people know if this will be applicable to the use case that they have.
Basically, a lot of the things that we saw when we popped up Martha's description of the data source, right? You build that, and then you come to it, and you understand, could I use it again? All right, so that's what we do in 2 weeks. Who's ready to come work for Tableau Professional Services? It's a fun job. It can be a little much sometimes, but it is fun, right? So one of the things that we've seen a lot of our customers do, and this is, I think, a problem when I was running analytics teams as a customer, right, is eventually you might have a portfolio of 10 to 15 to 20 workbooks, right? That's under your purview. You might have a team of 5 or 6 people. First truth of product management is that products never die, right? So these are some ways you might want to think about your whole entire ecosystem of products to make your life a little bit easier, because you're going to have to make changes and updates as you go, right? Once it's done, it's not done, right? It's just resting in between iterations. So, oh, look at that animation, so slick, right? This is one lane over on the blueprint, right? This is what we call measurement. So a lot of the stuff, if you're in the blueprint documentation, you're gonna find this under measurement. Some of this is a little of our own stuff as we're going through as well, some other best practices, right? A couple of things you want to keep in your mind, right, when you're looking at things, kind of the 2 big things. One, measurement, right? So how many people are actually using this, right? If you have, say, a workbook that's used by, 25 people once a month, right, probably pretty easy to go ahead and make changes. Hey, Joe, hey, we're going to make some changes to the monthly business review. You've told us you want to do these things. We're going to go ahead and do it this week. If you have a visualization that's being used by 6,000 retail branch managers on a daily basis, right, it's a little bit of a different animal, right? So understanding how your tools are being used out there in the wild is critical, right? Kind of 2 different ways you want to approach that. We'll talk about then some of the actual things that we do when we go in and we're talking to folks around getting feedback and that type of thing. Right, so default admin views, if you don't have anything else, your default admin views are the best way to look at content measurement, right? So how many people are going to this, right? Are they going to it weekly, daily, monthly? You'll start to see these usage patterns, and without even looking at the title of a workbook, a lot of times I can say, oh, this is the monthly business review, right? This is the daily whatever, right? This is the weekly whatever. This is for Joe's 9 a.m. volume call that he holds, right, every Monday. You'll start to get a sense of how many people are using this, right, and what times they're using it, right? If you can get into your underlying PostgreSQL database that's in every single Tableau server, you can start to pull together some interesting stuff, right? Looking at number of people viewing and what was the average load time of those views, right? This is actual from something Maureen and I worked on internally for Tableau this spring, and we can start to see our earlier versions over here that weren't necessarily so performant, and then the final version that came in that was a lot more performant, right? So these are one of those things that, and really, it's Laura sandbag, the performance issues were really easy to rectify, but you want to go through as you're looking and like that, it should be more performant like once you're good to go and in production, right? But looking at that, right, if you have something that a lot of people are using and the performance isn't as good, you probably want to start working on that first versus what a lot of people are using and it's performing well, right? Things to think about. How are you going to capture feedback, right? These are the comments. This is what we use internally at Tableau, and this is actually from the project. Yeah, look at that. Look at that wonderful leadership and direction, right? So this is a great way to actually get comments from users. We really encourage, absolutely, especially in your sandbox folders, your testing folders, it's a much easier way to capture comments, right? If you also have web editing turned on, you can go ahead, look at that comment, open up the interface, and make that adjustment, you're good to go. Right? It's fast, right? We want to be as fast as we possibly can when we're working with this. Also, you get live sessions, right? You can have WebEx sessions if your users are all over the world. Trust me, if your name's an owner on a piece of content, you're going to get emails. You're going to get IMs, right? You're going to get requests that are coming in. Jill Slackta, she wanted to make some changes. She IM'd us, right? So it's the nature of the beast. Important here is the idea that each new request, as you hear a lot of these, you're going to work these into a story, right? And the story is going to now flow into your overall product management process, right? Other things you can do, actual user research, like Maureen mentioned at the beginning, right? Pull this up in front of someone. Hey, Joe, I see you use this a lot. Can you show me this? Can you show me that, right? How do you use this? Let's talk a little bit about it. It doesn't have to be a full-on 1 hour formal interview. This can be 5-10 minutes, right? 5-10 minutes is enough to really get a lot of observations in place from someone how someone is using the product, right? Right? Once you might have a couple different stories, right? This gets collected into a roadmap for your product, and there you are, right? You're back at the beginning, right? So you're back to doing this, right? Okay, how do we want to do this? Maybe get a little sketch of the improvement, right? Going in, looking at the data. Oh, we can add this, or it's already there. We need a new calc, whatever the case may be, right? You want to think about how these changes are going to work. And one other thing that's not on here, but it's critically important. How are you going to communicate these changes to the audience, right? We talked about that up front. If you've got 35 people that are using this for a monthly business review, that's one thing. If you have 6,000 people that are using this daily out in the field, that's another thing, right? For those things that are a little bit larger, you're going to need to prep them a lot beforehand and saturate every single message channel that they have, right? Again and again and again and again.
So I mentioned sharing resources with others if you've already done a lot of the legwork. So that's what we want to do for you guys. You guys are going to be getting all of this content in an email at the end of the week, or the link to access the content. So within our slide deck, we've included a couple little cheat sheets of questions that you can ask your users along the way when you're designing. So we've broken it up into 3 categories, some product design questions that you can consider, as well as some data design questions to consider when you are working through your model. And finally, some visual design questions to consider as well. I won't go into every single question, but again, you guys will be able to access all of this. So if you want to print it out, keep it on your phone or something like that to kind of have your little cheat sheet with you when you're in your consulting or development meetings. Another thing, we have been working on a white paper of our own that is a field guide. That's the more detailed version of everything that we went over in this session today. So that will be available for download as well when you look into the resources for this session. Again, an additional resource for you that we've compiled are the links to not only the white papers that I went over when we discussed phase 3, but some additional white papers as well as our favorite blogs and training videos, et cetera, that we use constantly as refreshers, inspiration, etc. And Ben was also nice enough to provide his Data Nerd book club list that you guys can access if you want to buy any of those specific books.
Some of these are actually free. A couple of these are white papers that are out there, just wonderful articles that really explain in depth some of the concepts we've been going into here. Some of them are books, Big Book of Dashboards. That's absolutely, I think, I wish I had that book 10 years ago. I didn't have that book 10 years ago. I started with Stephen Few and Ed Tufte and a couple other ones. They're great books, but I wish that book was around 10 years ago. I think it's only about a year and a half, 2 years old. But hands down, if I put a plug down for Mr. Cotgrave and Mr. Wexler, they did fantastic stuff in that book as well. All right, so kind of the idea here, right? Where do we go from here? So kind of what's next as we think about these things. This is Grandma Kay. This is one of my favorite photos, the whole entire family. So my grandma, when she was 14 years old, she drove 1,000 miles from Waterton, Wisconsin to New York City and back again, right? Took a good chunk of the summer, and it was an adventure, right? Grandma Kay, she was, she liked to have a good time, right? She wasn't afraid to go out into the wild and go see what was going on out there. Much like if you were developing stuff 10 years ago in Tableau, there wasn't really a lot of stuff out there, right? A couple blog posts, a couple training videos on the website, that was about it, right? Same type of idea, right? We weren't really sure, we just knew we had to go east, right? And come back west eventually, right? And so I think about that a lot, and I contrast that with my kids, right? So my kids will be driving sooner rather than later, right? In a couple short years, one on the right, number one son, will be driving. But the question is he going to have that sort of adventure, right? You know what I mean? We've got self-driving cars, right? We can click a button, it's going to show up if he wants to go to New York City. He's going to push the button and jump in the car and go to New York City, right? But it's still sort of the same idea, right? You still have to understand where you want to go, right? Your conveyance might be a little easier, but I think those things that we talked about when we talk about like performance and visual design and all those things are the same, right? You got to know where you're going to go on your trip, regardless of how you get there, right? And you still got to take the trip. That's the most important part, right? A lot of people get scared of taking the trip because it is going to be, the first time you do it, it might be a little bit more like Grandma Kay. After 10 years, it's a little bit more like, my kids, right? Kind of push the button, all right, let's go design the dashboard, or I come back later, went to New York City, right? It's still important, though, that you understand kind of those things, like where are we going with all this? Now, some of you who do like adventure, you might be a little sad, right? You might say, oh gosh, eventually it's just going to be pushing a button on my phone and, it's going to be gone. I like this idea, right? Adventure and evolution to me are kind of very much in point, right? You need a little bit of pressure to make things good. And so the question is, adventure still out there, right? What are we going to do, right? Eventually it's all going to be push button automated, dashboards are built, walk away. Yeah, I think there's probably a good bit of adventure still left, right? So as we're looking at this internally, our big questions are, gosh, what are we going to do with Einstein? What are we going to do with MuleSoft, right? These are things that are going to radically extend how we do the product, right? So adventure's still out there. We're going to be out banging around on this stuff for the next couple of months and years, trying to figure out, right? But at the end of the day, we're still taking that trip. I think that's what we got. This is, please give your survey. Give us good, give us bad, give us ugly. We're happy to take it all and make this a little bit better for you. We do have about 5 minutes left or so. So we're happy to open it up to any type of Q&A if you want to do a little Q&A, if you want to drill into something a little bit more. And happy to stay after a little bit too if you want to chat as well. But thank you for coming. You had a lot of opportunities to go to a lot of different sessions. I hope this was worth your time.
Thank you.